Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about what tools you must have in the kitchen. There are kitchen stores out there with hundreds of beautiful and cool gadgets, but you don't need most of those. We're going to talk about what tools you really do need in the kitchen in order to make those delicious, mouth-watering meals for you and your family. First up, we're going to talk about knives. I think there are 3 knives that everyone should have. The first is a chef's knife. So you don't necessarily need anything this big if you feel a little intimidated by it, but make sure it has a nice straight edge. This is what you're going to use for chopping and slicing your veggies and all around workhorse in the kitchen. Second knife is a paring knife. It's much smaller. You're going to use this for your fine cutting and precision work, especially like berries, chopping little items, little knife. Also, you can open a lot of packages with this, which is always helpful. The third knife that I recommend is a serrated knife. So it has these little teeth along the side, like a tiny saw. And the way that this knife is extremely helpful is when you are cutting a loaf of bread or you're slicing through a cake layer in order to get 2 even layers to then build your cake. These little teeth bite into your product, and instead of smushing your loaf of bread, it allows you to gently cut through it, and that cell structure stays nice and open. Now, you don't need to spend hundreds of dollars on knives, not at all. You can buy sets of knives like these for very reasonably priced, and as long as they're sharp, they'll still do the job perfectly well. If you have knives with guards, kind of like this, these are great breeding grounds for germs. So what that means is you might wash your knife and there could be a little bit of bacteria still on here you didn't get to. You put it in the guard, the bacteria gets nice and happy in here. You take your knife out to use it again, you wash it, you clean it. If you're putting it back in a dirty guard, your knife is automatically dirty. So, if you have these guards, I recommend sanitizing them about once a month. You can use diluted bleach, just very simple sandy solution, let it soak for about 10 minutes, and then let it dry, completely dry, and then you know that you're putting your clean knife into a clean guard. So now let's talk about cutting boards, because you gotta cut on something. So I have 3 great boards here, and I love color coordinating things. So I always use the green one for fruits and veggies, black one typically used with raw meat, and then the wood one here is great for breads and pastry items. Now, you don't need multiple separate cutting boards, but I do find that it's helpful, keeps me organized, and it's kind of nice that each board has its specific job. I use these every time I have something on the stove. I love using this one specifically for stir fries. You can really move the veggies around that pan much more efficiently with this little point. Anytime you're boiling pasta or beans or any grains, I like this one to just give it a nice little stir. And then if you're cooking a big soup, if you've got a tall stock pot, you want something with a longer handle. If you've got a short handle, your hand's going to be in there and you might sear off your skin a bit. So having at least one with a long handle is always smart, and it may save you some burns. All right, the next active cooking utensil is tongs. I love these tongs. It's great if you're searing a steak, you pick it up, you flip it over, easy peasy. Or if you have a hot bowl and you don't have a hot pad handy, you can pick the bowl up and they just kind of become an extension of your pincer hand. And so they're very useful. I also love using smaller ones, especially as serving tools. I find that whenever people are reaching in, whether it's a salad or a pile of grilled veggies or any sort of you know, a mousse-bouche type single serve. It's so much easier to use these to grab them and add them to your plate instead of stabbing it with a fork or trying to balance it on a spoon or spatula or something. So now let's talk about what you're actually going to cook your food in. So one has a lid and you boil stuff and you make sauces in it. If you can only get one saute pan, get the biggest one. If you have the big one, you can do small stuff like eggs, or big things like stir fries, or you can lay a steak in here, like your steak is gonna fit. Chicken breasts are gonna fit well in here. If you're using too small of a pan to cook meat, it may not cook evenly. And in order for one part of it to get cooked to a safe temperature, your other parts may have dried out by that point. Having one baking dish is always important, at least one of these. Of course, you can bake cookies and all kinds of yummy desserts on them. Of course, it works great for roasting veggies or fish in the oven, but you can also find uses for it where it doesn't even go in the oven. So, you know, this one is nice and heavy bottoms and it stays very flat. So you can use it if you are prepping a lot of stuff and you need something that's going to stay nice and flat. You know, this is very useful. And kind of move this off to the side and stack things above and below it. Because it's nice and sturdy, it's not going to bow or anything. A great tool for cooking and baking alike are rubber spatulas. These are great whenever you want to get all of your ingredients out of the bowl and into the next step. Right? You want to get everything that's in the bowl out and into your final meal. So these, you know, work great to hug around the corners of the bowl. Make sure that they are pretty flexible. The softer and more flexible, the easier they are to use. Kind of leading off of that is a bowl scraper. This is maybe something that you haven't seen in many home kitchens. These are wonderful. If you go to pastry school, keep your eye on these because other people will take yours and feign innocence. These do a similar job to these, but much more efficiently because look at how much more space you've got there. Yes, if you're working with something extra gooey, you might get your fingers a little messy, but that's part of the fun, right? And this is the perfect tool for folding a mousse because you want to get your hand in there and you want to kind of feel that texture. These are like $3 or $4 and these will never cease to amaze me with how functional and useful they are. Now you may have noticed I have not talked about cups or teaspoons or any measuring devices yet. That is because I don't love those measuring tools. My favorite tool to use for measurements is a digital scale. It is so much quicker and more efficient than cups, and instead of searching through in a third of a cup or 1 cup and using all of these different tools, if you always measure in ounces or always measure in grams, it's a simple click of the button to tear it out, get you back to 0, and then add your next ingredient on top. I'm gonna get a lot of converts. My goal is to convert all of you to using this digital scale. This is more important when it comes to baking over cooking. Baking is much more exact and you really want to have that like 1/4 of an ounce, 1/10 of an ounce. It can make a noticeable difference in your final product. Whenever it comes to cooking, it is more about your personal preference. Cooking has much more leeway where you can kind of taste and adjust as you go. But I do still use a scale whenever I'm cooking because I've just gotten used to that. Thermometers, very, very important. Have a thermometer with you. When you're cooking meat, you want to make sure that it gets to those safe internal temperatures. It will prevent foodborne illness. Also, a thermometer can be very important once you get into candy making or caramel making. Some icings, if you're doing an Italian buttercream, the thermometer will be helpful. Last but not least, and many of you may say, well, that's not really a kitchen tool, is it? It is. Green scrubbies for washing dishes. This is my favorite dishwashing tool. I love that it has a rough texture, but it's not so abrasive like steel wool, where it's gonna actually like damage your pans or knives or anything. It's soft enough where it won't harm your tools, but it's rough enough that it will get your everything clean. Cooking doesn't stop when you eat the meal. Cleaning up is very important too. Having the right tool to keep all of your other kitchen tools clean and well cared for is going to lengthen the life of all of your kitchen equipment and save you money in the end. Thank you for hanging out with me. Comment below if there are some other kitchen topics that you'd like more information on. I've got some good ideas in the works, so join me next time. See you next time, and we hope you cook a joyful, memorable meal in the meantime.